Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Drinks and Dress. I'd like to apologize for the helicopter behind me. Artist housing in residencies are often very odd, and so, as you know from our last episode, I'm still working on a production in Southern Utah. Two shows open this weekend, so looking forward to it at the Tuacahn Center for the Arts. I'd like to welcome everyone to this episode of Drinks and Dress, sponsored by the Costume Society of America, and in our series Conversations on Dress. I'm super excited to welcome Petra Slinkard, the curator at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts, as our guest. The Peabody Essex Museum, or PEM, as we lovingly refer to it, is a museum that holds an important collection of fashion, costumes, and textiles from around the world from the late 17th century forward. And since 2009 has focused on collecting 20th and 21st century fashion. Petra has been at PEM for 3.5 years as the Director of Curatorial Affairs and the Nancy B. Putnam Curator of Fashion and Textiles. Before this position, she spent time at the Chicago History Museum and the Indianapolis Museum of Art. Her educational background includes a BS in fashion merchandising, a BA in art history, and an MS in fashion history. And with that, I would like to extend a great warm welcome to my friend and dear colleague, Petra. It's so great to see you, Petra. How are you?
Thank you, Leon. I'm so good, and I'm so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you for hosting me this evening.
We're really looking forward to it. So as a little bit of a disclosure to the audience, about a year and a half ago, just before, literally days before we
Days
all
before.
shut down, days before we all shut down for COVID, Petra, Monica Sklar, and I were working on with some great volunteers from the Northeast region. Correct? I'm saying that correctly, Petra?
Mhm.
From the Northeast region for some Digital Angels efforts at PAM, and we'll talk about that later. But it was such a fantastic experience to see their collection, to be able to see part of the museum, which is a gorgeous hidden gem in Salem, Massachusetts. We often think of Salem as the center of all things witchy, witch. And it is that, so it's really super fun. But Pam was a wonderful experience, and I had no idea the amazing array of objects in this museum's collection. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Petra, and let's talk about your collection and what you're going to talk about today.
Sure. Well, thanks, Leon. It was a pleasure to work with you and Monica on the Digital Angels project. And in fact, as I'm looking at the screen here in the bubble on the far right-hand side in the center, you'll get to see this in a little bit greater detail in this brief presentation that I'll give. But it is a light green ensemble by the American designer Rosie Asselin. And that was actually part of our Digital Angels project. And because of the work that we did as a group on Digital Angels, we were able to incorporate this work in our recent rotation in our fashion and design gallery. So I'm going to take you on an armchair tour, and I promise to kind of keep the slides to as much of a minimum as I possibly can. But I know that there are people out there who are really interested in our collection, and coming from Chicago, growing up in the Midwest, I have really enjoyed my time in Salem, but I fully recognize that it's a little bit over the river and through the woods. So it is a destination for many people. And so, the Peabody Essex Museum is a really interesting museum because we are we sort of occupy this strange space of both being the oldest continually operating museum in the United States, and also in our current iteration, we're only about 26 or 27 years old. So the museum began as two separate entities, the East India Marine Society, which was founded in 1799, and then later the Essex Institute, which formed independently as a repository for collecting library material primarily, but also decorative and American fashion as a place to represent the history of the county of Essex. And in 1982, those two institutions merged into one. So this is the entrance to the museum. It began, as I said, quite small, and over the years it has grown quite a bit. We have undergone 2 major expansions. Well, actually, that's not true. 3 major expansions, once in the 70s, once in 2003, which is the entrance that you see here. And then once in 2018, going into 2019, which was really what I was hired for. So I had the opportunity to come to Salem, which Leon mentioned is a small town in Massachusetts. Our population is only 50,000 or so. But we are very much connected to Boston. We're on the rail line, and we do see a lot of tourism. So in the month of October alone, I think we have about 500,000 people that come through our town, which is pretty incredible given that the town is only 5 miles square in radius. So people who might be interested in the collection, and this is kind of an interesting place to start, I think, Leon, particularly since we can talk a little bit about the Digital Angels project. We are actively collecting at our institution, and the project that the Digital Angels came to help me with was specific to a collection that we acquired in 2018. It was 90 pieces of contemporary fashion from a woman by the name of Rana Sadiq, who is located in Kuwait. And the Angels came, as they do in other collections, and helped us address, they helped us document, they helped us photograph, and really dig into the metadata for our collection. But as Leon mentioned, our collection has a lot of depth and breadth to it, in part because of the history of the East India Marine Society. So the charge of those individuals was to round the Cape of Horn and the Cape of Good Hope, and to bring items back from their travels that would provide literally sort of a window to the world for people living in Salem, which at that time was a major metropolis. Okay, so this is just a very, very quick cursory tour of some of the items that we do have in our collection. And really, I'm just showing this to you to, again, kind of show the depth and breadth of what we have. And the museum's collection boasts one of the largest, if not the largest, collection of shoes in the United States, in part because this area of New England was the hub of the shoemaking industry. But there was also a company in our area called the M. Hart Corporation, and they collected shoes from all around the world in an effort to study and to better understand, how shoes have been formed and how people have worn shoes throughout time in various cultures. And when they disbanded in 1977, they donated over 5,000 pairs of shoes to the Peabody Essex Museum. And that's one of the things that sort of makes its way into our new fashion and design gallery. I also included a Charles Frederick Worth gown because, of course, I think people are always very interested in seeing Worth gowns that maybe they haven't seen in the past. And this was one that was worn by a woman in Salem who had spent some time in England, and this was her presentation gown. But then we also have everyday examples of clothing. This is a piece by Helena Barbary, thinking about the 1950s and 40s and 50s as she was designing for modern couture, to anything maritime in our collection. Usually gets a little bit of extra play because we are very much, by many people, considered a mariner's museum. And so this is kind of a fun play on that idea, this Gucci tunic with this sea-inspired print.
I love Gucci. That's amazing.
Isn't it great? I love that. And so in learning, really digging into the history of the print designer, the printmaker, also was just really fabulous because, this is a piece, and we could get into this a little bit too. How much I enjoy social media as a tool for accessing other people's collections. And most recently I saw a dealer post a tunic very similar to this. And I thought, how great that we can share, both of our versions and both of our colorways. And that's just a wonderful way to be connected as well. To also, of course, thinking about, our own history in New England. So this is a fur cape that was recently acquired by Wilson, which was outlet that was occupied on Boylston Street in Boston, to thinking of shifts in fashion history. So this is a leopard coat from the 1960s that was purchased and worn by the donor just before it was outlawed to bring in specifically leopard, but other exotic pelts. To works of contemporary art, such as this purse by Isao Takeda, who is using Japanese brewing fabrics to create this purse, but also thinking about ergonomic design. And so in this way, I think it really does embody that idea of like fashion as sculpture. To thinking about collections like Claire McCardle's, as we sort of continue to find our way on the map. I had a wonderful experience with a donor who had gone to the Met and said, I have this collection of Claire McCardle dresses, and the Costume Institute said, well, we have enough. We have her represented very well in our collection. And so they offered up a couple of other institutions that they might call, and we were one of them. And so when I spoke with this woman on the phone, I said, well, where are you located? And she said, oh, I'm in Salem. And it turned out that her grandfather was a pattern maker for Claire McCardle. And so not only did we get to acquire a number of her dresses, but also the wedding dress that he had made for his daughter-in-law, based on a McCardle pattern. She had given him permission to do so, and in McCardle fabric. So, they're always sort of looking for those fun little moments.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And then, of course, we got to use this in our latest exhibition, which was one called Made It, The Women Who Revolutionized Fashion, which was a totally bizarre experience. Very wonderful, but very bizarre because we opened in November and we closed in March. So the entire experience took place during COVID. And it was a great learning experience. We had amazing partners, fantastic lenders. There were 108 mannequins in the show. It was a little heartbreaking that not more people could come and see it. But what an experience to be able to, work with some of these designs up close. This is an example of Mary Mecco. That was purchased through Design Research, another outlet in Cambridge that was at one point in time the primary outlet for Mary Mecco. To Oscar de la Renta, the population, the immigrant population in Salem is primarily Dominican, but also Brazilian. And so we have since in the last few years really focused on Oscar de la Renta, and my goal is to eventually continue to focus on other Dominican-based designers. To thinking about building out our library, and looking at periodicals and research. So I'm going to stop here for just a moment and see if there are any questions, Leon, that you might have before I dig into the Fashion and Design Gallery.
Oh my gosh, so many. Okay, so first one, I want to ask about the exhibition. So you said you started in November and closed in March, all during the time of COVID. And so how did you get audience or viewers there? How did you do a virtual tour? What were some of the things that you as a museum or as a curator did to get the word out? And this might be a great time, so before you answer, Petra, to say, now we can start looking at some cocktails. So if you have a cocktail ready to go, tonight's cocktail is the East India cocktail in honor of the seafaring trade that is the history of PEM. And again, a great shout out, as always, to Anne Wass for the alcohol-free alternative, the East India Elixir. So Petra, okay, so how did you solve the challenges of COVID in that moment?
Wow. Well, it's an ongoing conversation. But I think some of the things that we learned were that virtual couriers really do work, but you obviously have to, trust the people that you're working with. And we were very lucky because we were working with the Kunstmuseum in The Hague, and we borrowed 60 pieces from them that were already created and ready to go in March, because initially the exhibition was going to open in May. So they just left everything created and ready for us then we did proceed with shipment in October, and they were unable to come to Salem. And so we worked with Deirdre Windsor Studio, which is an independent conservation studio in Massachusetts. And we just scheduled times, that worked either early in the morning or mostly early in the morning. And Cesar Rodriguez is their conservator. And it worked. They found a rhythm where our conservation team and our preparators, were working on dressing. And then if there was a problem, he was on screen, he was sort of half listening, to what was going on, but he was also being able to work in his own studio. And, so I think both teams felt productive. But they were there to support one another. And it was fantastic to watch them really get into some conversations on mounting, because the Kunstmuseum sent mounts with them, with some of the mannequins, and, just being in crates, some things needed to be adjusted. And so to watch these, professionals come together and problem solve in real time was a really exceptional experience. And then as far as getting the word out, we did have visitors. I think in total we had about 7,000 people come through the actual doors. We did timed and ticketed entry. Yeah, we had about, our limit was 40 people in the gallery at any one time. And, in the beginning you could feel like the sparseness in the gallery because people were afraid, rightfully so, and very cautious. But as we neared the middle of March, the last 2 weeks of the show were totally sold out, which of course felt great. But I did every single possible virtual tour you can think of. I beamed into people's classrooms. I did tours on my phone. I did 2 Facebook Live tours. We recorded a walkthrough that we put on our website. And, it was anytime someone asked, I did a PowerPoint presentation, on Zoom, because it felt very important, to get this exhibition out. And the comments and the questions that I received were fantastic. And I was able to engage with people, across the country, whom, even if the show was open and everything was totally normal, may not have had the opportunity to come and see it in person. So that was also pretty special.
That's awesome. Are those tours still available on Pam's website?
They are, yeah. I'll have to send you a couple of links. I know before the
Okay,
presentation, great. I sent Ashley a whole slew of links to blog posts, but I'll also send a couple of links to the tours as well, so people can check that out on their own.
Excellent. That would be awesome. Thank you so much, Petra.
You're welcome.
And I have another question. Like, so far you've talked about the collection holdings and how the museum is starting to focus, and you're starting to focus on certain areas and certain communities. What sort of not couture things does the collection have, or sort of lower middle class or lower class or average everyday person sort of stuff? How is that rounded out in the collection?
So that's a great question. And that actually you'll see more of in our fashion and design gallery. But we have everything from, Star Wars t-shirts to student projects. One of the wives of one of our curators is also a textile conservator. She specializes though in upholstery. And when she was in college, she created a dress out of shoelaces. And it is just like, ooh la la. And, but that was acquired before I came. And those are the things that I love, because, those are the one-off kind of quirky things that, people don't necessarily think about collecting at the time. But we also have, mariners clothing. We have lots of, yeah.
The sports mariners, or
we do.
Bearing Marin?
Yeah. We have a ball cap that was signed by David Ortiz. There was an exhibition that the museum did before I arrived with Stephen Jones in the V&A on hats, and it was an opportunity for us to include hats from our own collection. And so it was everything, from helmets, worn during the well, it wasn't really a helmet, but a uniform cap worn during the War of 1812 to, a David Ortiz, baseball hat. But that's kind of the range. We have a very strong Asian and Asian export collection.
Oh, cool.
We have a wonderful collection of Chinese textiles that were collected by the now curator of Asian art at the MFA, a woman by the name of Susan Bean. And Susan was going into markets in China in the 90s and, just buying up patchwork quilts that were used as door hangings or as window covers, or for, drop cloths for people, selling things. And those things are also displayed in our fashion and design gallery because, in my opinion, there's a really interesting conversation to be had as far as like hierarchy is applied to, how we absorb and interpret fashion and textiles.
I have a really obscure question for you about your Chinese quilts.
Okay.
Do any of them detail have images of the mangoes in them? Because there's this phenomenal. So this is super obscure. There's this really phenomenal history of the mango in Mao culture during Mao's period, that were turned into coverlets and things. And the story of how the mango is presented as a gift to Chairman Mao is really fascinating. There's a wonderful book out that I don't remember the title off the top of my head, but it's a really fascinating story in which this crate of mangoes is given to Chairman Mao, and it becomes this huge sensation, and he uses them politically to show favoritism to people, and at the time they're preserved in like formaldehyde or bronzed or things like this, and they become these small little like idols, but this craze lasts for only about 2 years, and so I'm aware of and personally know a collector who deals specifically in Mao and mango memorabilia.
Oh, interesting. So I don't know if we have anything specific to the mango. In the patchwork quilts, nothing comes to mind that would include the mango, but we do have another very nice collection that's pretty robust of printed quilt covers from the Cultural Revolution. And within those, and you'll see a few examples here, there's lots of iconography, everything from, factories to bridges, to, chrysanthemums that are all a part of this design. So it's possible that the mango makes an appearance in some of those.
It might be. Ooh, I can't wait to see. I met this collector when I was on a trip to Beijing, and I was just like, oh my God, what a fascinating, bizarre little moment. Parades with giant mangoes in them, seriously. I will look up. It's really fascinating. So, okay, so why don't we carry on? I could talk with you, Pedro, for hours and hours. Not, maybe that's entertaining to our audience, I'm not sure, but...
So I mentioned I showed you the entrance, and here what you see is a rendering of our new wing. And on the left-hand side, which is sort of cut in half, is the view of our East India Marine Hall, which was our original building. And that was built in 1825 to house the collection that was being accumulated from 1799 on. And to the right of it is our new wing, which opened in September of 2019. Within that new wing, we have galleries dedicated to South Asian art, to Asian export art, to maritime art, and then the top floor is our fashion and design gallery. And I had mentioned that this was part of my charge when I arrived. So I had 1 year. I arrived in January of 2018, and we opened the gallery in September of 2019 to get to know the collection, to understand, what the museum's psychology was, to understand, what our mission was as it pertained to exhibition development, to interpretation. Pemberley definitely, I think, sees itself, and rightfully so, as a leader in interpretation and integrated media, as that is folded into our experiences. But one of the first questions, that I started to ask the team as I was getting on board and becoming more familiar is, how are you defining design? Because, all of you costume and textile people, how fragile cloth is, and what our responsibility is to rotate it in order to preserve it, but also that there is this sort of expandable definition to what design is. And when we started to think about, design, that word design, and I was thinking about art museums in the United States and the way in which design is usually presented, there tends to be a little bit more focus on high design. If you're lucky, there's some time spent on industrial design. But a lot of our collections, I think, that draw the most attention tend to be more focused on mid-century modern, or early colonial American. And, PEM's collection does not mid-century modern by any means. We are fortunate to have a very strong early American decorative arts department. But we also have all of these objects in our collection that represent many time periods and many different cultures. And so we started to adopt this idea that design is really all around us, and that it embodies us, and it is what makes us unique as humans. And the big idea that we adopted is very broad, but that it is simply that we are designing creatures, and that we design for our bodies, our environment, and our society. And that the way that we design, influences how we live and communicate and express ourselves, and it reinforces our behaviors. But it was a way, because it was a tremendous opportunity to look at our vast global collection, but it was very daunting as well, because it was just like, where do you begin? How are we going to work out all of these kinks?
Well, because I'm sorry to interrupt again.
No,
like, where do you begin? I mean, like, Pam has houses.
Yes, we have 24 historic houses.
Yes, right. So some of the audience members may not know that, like, right down the street from the beautiful entrance of the museum is one of the historic houses, or two of the historic houses, that Pam holds in their collection. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. Yes. And it also housed the first period rooms in the country. So design has always been a part of the DNA at the museum, but design that is lived with design. And I think that that's a point of distinction in the way that we approached, our process. So I'm going to fast forward here for just a moment and show you our floor plan. So where my mouse is, if you can see it moving on the screen, one of the other challenges that we had to contend with is, this was about 5,500 square feet. And there's an entrance here, you come up the stairs and you enter here, and there's an entrance here where you come up the elevator. And so one of the things that we had to figure out is, well, is this a scripted experience? Do you enter and exit in one direction? And there was no way that we could guarantee that. And so what we decided to do was to do an intro, a bookended experience on either end. And so that's where you see the two red arrows that are part of the introduction. And so one way that we decided to deal with this idea of, shaking off any preconceived notions of what people might or might not think about fashion and or design when they're coming to a fashion and design gallery. So we created this intro space. And in the intro space, there are objects that pertain to the various sections, the thematic sections that we plotted out through the gallery. And then where the three arrows are on the screen are television monitors that are a series of moving images that present everything from, people walking on a runway to putting on makeup, to geisha walking down the street, to someone pouring concrete, to, a light speed rail in operation, to someone blowing glass. And it was really to try to hone in and focus on the maker, because we knew that if we were going to talk about design and fashion, it was very important, since we were choosing sort of a humanistic approach, that we wanted the focus to be on people. And so then the other guiding sort of force in our organizational structure was that we didn't want to dictate to visitors what design was, or what fashion is, or to try to categorize it as good or bad or high or low, because design exists to improve our lives. And sometimes it's successful, sometimes it isn't, but it, of course, occupies a whole range of successes, as we move through. So what we did was we proposed this idea that fashion and design can, and then each of the sections then go on to answer or offer an answer of some kind that pertains to how fashion and design exists in our lives. And so the first that you see here is fashion or design and fashion can be intricate. And each of the sections also propose a question to get the visitor to start to think about themselves in this conversation. And so in this case, the question for the first platform is, what's the most complex thing you've ever made? And so these are some of the renderings. And this is the first section, which features a bed that was made in China. It is hand carved. And it is, I think, 187 individually carved pieces. There are no nails. There's no glue. And so everything about this design is really quite intricate, but it's also, beautifully made in order for it to stand on its own. But it was made for display. It was made for debut at the Philadelphia World's Fair, and it was presented in the United States as the best of the best of wood carving from this area in China. And so then we started to think about, our textile collection. And so what you see suspended around the bed are domestic textiles where, you would never really have an opportunity to see these kinds of textiles unless you were invited into someone's home. And so what you see from left to right is a kantha, to an American summer quilt just behind the red and white, which is appliqué, to a Chinese patchwork hanging just beyond that, to the two Cultural Revolution quilt covers on the right-hand side. And as I mentioned, rotations is constantly on my mind. And so we had to also assure that the way that we designed this gallery was done in a way that we could continue to keep up with our rotations. So we just completed one, and as I move from that slide to this slide, you'll see that the textiles have since changed, but the setup remains the same.
I love this idea of that question of what's the most intricate thing you've made. I mean, immediately as a professor, this makes me think about my students who are so accustomed to these things, and thinking of and getting them to learn how to make things. And this is a great. I'm going to invite you to I'm here officially inviting you to my freshman class in the fall.
Anytime.
To talk about this, because the notion, we always grapple with these questions, especially coming from students or people learning, like, I spent so much time on this, and it may or may not look good, or it may or may not have achieved the goal. And so how do you grapple with those things? So I love that. That's one of the early questions that the viewer gets, is what's the most intricate thing you've made? It's really interesting.
Well, and then our next question is, what would you design if you let your imagination run wild? And all of the works here are made of either wood or glass. And so that was very deliberate, because, of course, wood and glass is ubiquitous. I mean, it's everywhere, from, the pencils we use to the cell phone, covers that we have.
Yes, exactly.
And so, these artists are really pushing those boundaries, like the boundaries of those materials, and thinking about contemporary wood and glass in a totally different way. And so these represent two collections. One is a Rabinovitz glass collection, and the other is a Boland contemporary wood collection. And then kind of honing in on the individuality. So this idea that fashion design can be expressive, and that clothes do say something about who we are. And so this is what we affectionately call our fashion lineup. And the point here was to really be able to showcase, the range of clothing that we have in our collection. And so to your earlier question, about everyday and more commonplace items, if you look next to the yellow skazi, you'll see a woman with a stocking cap on, and that is a ski uniform, where it still has the tags on it from the last time that she rode the ski lift, in Vermont, which I think was like 1991.
Please tell me that's a denim skirt from 1989.
It is it is a Chanel, yes. And so like pushing at Lagerfeld's both reverence and irreverence for Chanel. This is one of those perfect examples. And then next to it is a Bhutanese ensemble. The pink cape is Liberty. And then as we work our way down, one of the ways that we tried to organize this, potential chaos is by color. And so as we move through, this is the second rotation. So you'll see if I toggle back and forth, what changed and what has stayed the same. So if you look at the 1860s, this 1860s dress, the blue with the black trim, is replacing the light blue wedding dress. We have the Mary Mecco in the red, but some of the pieces did stay because they are more contemporary. They've not been on view before, so we were able to extend their life a little bit. In the center, you will also see a yellow Red Cross uniform. We wanted to pay homage and respect to many of the frontline workers who got us, well, we haven't totally gotten through COVID yet, but have carried us through COVID thus far. And so here are some detailed shots for you of the Lagerfeld and the Bhutanese, and also the new rotation on the top. And then this is the backside. So you'll see our raccoon coat here. This is Margiela. We have a beautiful embroidered house dress here. And then our black and whites were on the platforms just beyond the fashion lineup, the colorful platform. The dress that you see here in the center with the bugle beading is Alexander Mcqueen, and the dress displayed on the mannequin in a wheelchair is a design by a gentleman named Jay Calderon, who is in the Boston area, and he made this specifically for the first Boston fashion accessibility project that took place in the city.
Oh, cool.
With a woman who is a doctor. Her name is Dr. Sherry Blawett, and they designed this together because he went to her and said, what are you looking for? And she said, I want a ball gown. And they talked through together, what is challenging about buying an off-the-rack ball gown. And so you can see here, this fold has opened, and this fold where the mannequin's hand is folded over the skirt. And that was a deliberate part of the design. So when the chair is in motion, she can fold up both sides of the skirt, and it magnetizes at center front. And then when she is static in her chair, she can open up both sides, and it envelops the chair and really gives off that effect of the ball gown.
Oh, that's very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great piece. I'm really excited to have just acquired it. Jay is he's an educator in Boston. He teaches at the Boston Fashion School. He's also the founder of the Boston Fashion Week. He's been a huge force in this area. So I'm just happy to be able to represent his collection or his work in our collection. This is another recent round of rotations that you'll see that differ slightly. So to the left off the screen is the raccoon coat, and that dress in the center is that Rosie Asselin dress. And then you'll notice the Korean ensemble that I actually asked Leon to help with because he is an expert in Korean dress. And so, kind of going back again to COVID, but I think also tapping into our network, through CSA and through all of these wonderful colleagues who are all specialized in our own ways, to be able to call you up and, take photographs and say, okay, are we doing this correctly? And, are we doing this in a respectful manner? I did something very similar with the Bhutanese ensemble and reached out to a woman who works for the Bhutanese Foundation in New Hampshire, and she couldn't come to Salem to help me dress the ensemble in person. And so I just sent her detailed photos. We worked together and sort of on Zoom and tweaked the ensemble to assure that it was being dressed in the right way.
This is really lovely. I mean, that's a beautiful Humboldt ensemble. But I also love the man's dressing gown that you have there, or smoking jacket, however you're
Yes.
calling it.
Yes, we're calling it a dressing gown. One of our colleagues came into the gallery and saw that, and he said, "I want to enter every party with a cap and a tassel." So he's definitely a crowd favorite. Just an extension of this, we do have this interactive that we engage people in the gallery with, which is an opportunity for people to express themselves. And I will periodically post some of these on Instagram, and the responses are so beautiful. You have children who are drawing, you have people who are revealing something about themselves, about the way that they dress, about the way that they feel in clothes, whether it's specific to identity or gender. Or just, their favorite color, as simple as that sounds. But one of the things that has been the most fascinating is that these are all paint swatches. And we thought immediately that it would just be a total mess, within the first month. And it has been amazing how many people are so respectful, and they truly take the time to match up each color. So the range stays this really beautiful rainbow.
That's beautiful. What you just said about how people feel in their clothes really strikes a chord with me as a costume designer, because I don't know, I've never designed fashion. It's never been a desire of mine. But what's been very interesting about designing costumes, and what I love about it, is working with performers who respond to it, and interpreting the work so that way they can feel what their character is about to become. And when it moves on stage I don't really do film, but so that's really interesting to me, that you talk about how you feel in clothes. And it's really true. The clothes we choose to wear, the fashions we choose to wear, or the non-fashions we choose to wear, really represent how we feel about ourselves and what we're trying to project about ourselves in many ways. So I like tapping into that in really interesting ways. And I think it's very conscientious for some people and very unconscious for other people.
Yeah, it's true. And, and I think for some people, they're very forthcoming. And for other people, it's definitely a harder question to answer. A big component of our gallery is Iris and Carl Apfel, she's wonderful and still living. She turns 100 at the end of this August. But we were able to acquire her collection, so they're represented in our gallery. And we really talk about how design and fashion can be your whole life, because she and he were both interior designers and textile designers. And so this is that display. And then we do have a small furniture section where we talk about design supporting us, both literally and figuratively, but that, again, sort of being democratic in how we think about what is good design and how it functions within our living spaces. So this is that section. And then thinking about transportation and the way in which we move through the world and all the various ways. And it was also an opportunity for us to show off our shoe collection. So this is how we laid it out. And we made the decision to only show one shoe within a pair so we could squeeze more in. But so here is the display in person. And we have everything from Robert Wadlow's shoe to a Bhutanese shoe to a shoe. The boot on the far left-hand side was worn in 1932 on an excursion to Alaska, to Tom Thumb's shoe. So there's quite a range there. And then we have these hot topic zones, which in and of itself is sort of already kind of an outdated way of referring to this. But we were trying to think about, what were topics in design that warranted deeper dives. And there are 3 of these sections in the gallery. One pertains to intimidation and empowerment. And so in this section, we have 4 works of art, a knit cave on the far right-hand side, a sculpture of a samurai warrior, a runway piece from Janae Watanabe, and then a uniform from the War of 1812. And thinking, precisely as you sort of said, like this idea of taking on armor, becoming, embodying, an entity. Sometimes, in some cases, it's through costume, but in other cases, it's through military dress, or, specifically in Nick Cave's case, it's this idea of, as he says in his own words, it's about power and standing up. And he was thinking about how you confront to stand up. And so kind of taking on this larger than life figure in his sound suits. To a discussion on appreciation and appropriation, where we hone in on, again, kind of a case study, if you will, and this idea of where do you draw that line? What is theft? What is appreciation? What is appropriation or co-opting someone's designs? And so the works that we included here is a bark cloth from Samoa from the late 1800s, an ensemble from the 1930s that was made in Hawaii. And you see that the print is almost identical. So the Hawaiians were importing Samoan bark cloth as early as the 1900s into the 1920s. So you can see that there's this cultural exchange that's happening there. To contemporary designers like Gary Graham, who visited PEM and looked at our entire collection, and you can see the sweater that he created on the left-hand side was drawn specifically from a swatch of bark cloth that was collected in the 1700s by Captain Cook as he was making his way from one island in the Pacific to another and collecting these samples. But, of course, taking that moment to acknowledge that there was some conversation that needed to be had in order for, Gary to borrow, to appropriate in appreciation, of this culture and this technique. And so this is that display there. And we do have the bark cloth sample book on display, and then a piece of bark cloth for people to touch. And then finally, just talking about body modification, which I think is kind of an age-old conversation in our field. But this idea that fashion can either define us or confine us, and all of the different ways in which we have adopted body modification, whether it's tattooing or piercing or, putting shoes on our feet or attaching a bustle to our body or corseting our body, is there are a variety of reasons for why we might do this, and how it is incorporated into our styles. And so the question here is, how did you style yourself today? And there are mirrors there, of course, for people to see themselves independently, but also, to see themselves within the context of the gallery. And that is it.
So my first question is, how has the response been to the redesign of the gallery?
It's been fun. It's been, I would say 90% of the time it has been very positive. But, certainly there are people who I think it's overwhelming. It's a lot of material. It's a lot to sort through. We definitely, I saw one review that was written in a kind of a think tank piece by a professor in Boston who was very discouraged by our section on appropriation, because, his standpoint was that cultural exchange has been a part of our design ethos, from the beginning, and that we were lecturing to him. Whereas I have witnessed people in the gallery also sort of walk away and say, I never really thought about it that way, So I try not to spend too much time thinking about the negative and think more about what conversations the gallery is stimulating, and right, try to perceive that as success.
Well, yeah, and the whole notion of the whole conversation around cultural appropriation is such a vast topic. I mean, that could be an exhibit unto itself.
Absolutely.
And maybe it's time for something like that. I mean, I think in some ways where we talk about it a lot, we debate it a lot within our organization and amongst our colleagues, and there's no way to really settle on it because of the complex histories involved with it. but being mindful of it is really the path forward. I loved what you did with the shoes. I loved that you had like one shoe out and showing all these different ones. That was really cool and fun. Um, was there actually a snowshoe in there, or what was the sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Sort of bamboo kind of shoe, or the woven shoe?
I think it was woven hemp, and it's a whaler's shoe. So it's basically kind of like a galosh that they would put, a shoe cover that they would put on in order to create some friction as they were walking across the bodies of a whale
Wow.
to harvest blubber.
You know, let's see, we have a problem. What are we going to do? Let's do this. Like, that is
Yeah,
the essence of design. It's like, we have a problem. We have a problem.
right.
Houston, we have a problem. You know,
Exactly.
how do we solve this problem? Like, that's amazing. How long will this redesign stay up for? Is this a permanent
Well,
installation,
it's
or
permanent.
is it? Okay, cool.
Yeah, the plan is for it to be permanent, but then those sections will rotate. So
Right.
pieces will rotate individually, or for instance, we may take the entire intimidation empowerment out. And one of the ideas that I'd like to focus on is technology.
Mhm.
Or we'll look at the appropriation and appreciation section and perhaps draw on our Native American collection, or look at Asian motifs as they've been co-opted throughout time. So that's kind of the plan, is to try to maintain enough flexibility so it keeps it fresh and keeps the conversations relevant, but not necessarily trying to do a whole exhibition over again, because we also still have our exhibition program too that
Right.
occupies a lot of time.
So how many sound suits do you have? I'm a huge fan of
Just
his.
one.
Just one.
Just
I'm a
one.
huge fan of his, and I have never. I mean, like, I loved the juxtaposition of that against the military uniform, and thinking of it in that way. I've always enjoyed the notion, or considered the idea of his work as power, and he's very clear about that in his work. And so I love the sound suits in that way, and often imagine them sort of just walking down the street at you and being like, what is this thing? Because that's would be a huge, powerful moment. But I love the juxtaposition against the military uniform, especially the historic military uniform, and that as symbols or representations of power. One that you can completely read if you are in the know of the language, meaning the uniform, and the other one that you cannot read at all. There is no way to decipher.
Yeah.
His work in some ways. So, other than the very performative aspects of it. So and that's the other thing that I like about what you guys are doing with that, is you're sort of tapping into the notions of performativity and performance, with those things, without actually being like, look, this is performative. See, he's performing. So
Yeah.
you're
No, thank you. My colleague Trevor Smith did an exhibition of Nick's work, I think maybe in 2013 or 14, and through that is where they acquired the sound suit.
cool.
And it was a little bit hard to see, but it's primarily like crocheted works. So there is also this very soft, approachable quality to it, and yet it's 8.5 feet tall. So
Have you been inside? I totally
no,
want to
I
go.
haven't.
I'm
No.
so desperate to wear one of his sound suits.
But I will say, without the sound suit on and you just see the mannequin, he has these fabulous crocheted, thigh high tights or stockings that ground the piece. And I would love to be able to know what that felt like to wear.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's just it. That's what's so interesting about the array of things that this new exhibition has, is, you can imagine yourself in these things, or you start to imagine yourself using these things in those ways, using these objects, wearing these objects, writing these objects. I mean, And so that's actually also really interesting about what that is. We do have a really great compliment for you. Thank you, Pedro, for the exciting presentation. I look forward to visiting someday. Incredibly wonderful to see you so passionate and informative, Brooke.
Oh, thank you.
And another one is, thank you for this program. I'm grateful for the new insights. I hope to visit someday. Oh, here's a great question. What are the objects that you have from the 17th century?
That's a good question. On view, we don't have a lot, but we do have a few, and certainly in other galleries. If you're just speaking specifically about European or American, we have a pair of gloves. We definitely have a wonderful. We just had a witch trials exhibition, and we had a wonderful sampler on view. That was from the late 1600s. So primarily our textile collection tends to be more of the older pieces. And as far as our Korean and or Asian collections, our Native American collections, we do have some examples as well there. And I can direct you to a page where you could dig in to see a little bit more. We don't, unfortunately, we've put a lot of time and energy into our exhibition program and into this new wing. And the next, again, much thanks to Digital Angels, but across our departments, is really focusing on putting our collection online. So at the moment, we fully acknowledge that there isn't a lot of depth to get into on our website through our web portal, but it is a priority as we move forward.
Cool. And thank you for that. For those in the audience who are unfamiliar with this new program that is being developed through Costume Society of America, myself and Dr. Monica Sklar, and with the assistance of Kristen Miller-Zone, have been piloting a program, and Pam was part of the pilot for Digital Angels to help organizations learn how to digitize objects, and to actually digitize them, and to help organizations really delve into metadata as a way to help standardize some nomenclature, the really vast nomenclature issues that exist within our discipline, as well as any number of things in order to digitally preserve and conserve these objects. As a way to eventually, our ultimate goal is to have a searchable portal, website, database, whatever we're calling it at the moment, where collections can share their information online. And this is not just large institutions. In fact, we're really focusing on institutions that have various different kinds of need, historical societies, small institutions. One of the reasons we worked with Pam was of the 21st century collection that they had, from the collector, that had very unusual objects from different non-Western designers, as a way to sort of highlight that. So that we had an array of things. And again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, what do we have, like 12 volunteers, 14 volunteers? I'm forgetting.
Yeah, and I see Ellen Miller is here. I think that might be our Ellen Miller.
Hi, Ellen.
Who helped out.
Phenomenal volunteers who helped us out for the days that we did it, and it was such a great, and the staff at PEM were great. Petra is an army of one at PEM. So.
Thank you for saying that. Well, it's funny. Leon and I were talking about
force, Petra.
Well, thank you. But I recall you and I talking about Digital Angels specifically, but also just, again, kind of the strength of what CSA offers. And, if you would look at a gallery like ours, if you would look at our building, I think people make assumptions about, our staffing. But, not only am I a department of one, but I am one of 10 or 12 different departments, depending on what our staffing structure is. And each, of course, one of those departments requires a tremendous amount of support. And our back-end staff, our collection staff, our registration staff, is actually pretty minimal. And, so one of the things that Leanne and I were talking about is that we have great facilities, but we're still building up, our expertise. And that's where, we're hugely grateful to, working with individuals like Camille Breeze or like Deirdre Windsor, like Ellen Miller, and relying on that talent. Whereas another institution, as many of you probably represent, have that wealth of knowledge, that depth of knowledge, great data management systems or great institutional archives that maybe are a little bit more easy to navigate than some of ours, because we've had all of this personality turnover, as an institution is concerned over the years.
And, and I want to give a shout out to Martha and Margaret, who started the Angels Project many, many years ago, from which we are inspired to do Digital Angels because of their I'm going to say almost 2 decades of work of conservation. Martha will, I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong on that. It may be more, but it's a lot. I mean, it's amazing work, and it really speaks to the generosity that our organization has and our members have within CSA to in outreach and supporting each other. Okay, so with that, we are a little over time. Petra, I want to say thank you so much for all of this. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining today, and join us next month as we tackle another great institution and have a great conversation with our colleagues around the country. Petra, thank you so much. So great to see you.
Thank you.
And I can't wait to see you in person soon and have a cocktail together and talk about although if it's at home and it's your margaritas, I will be very, very safe.
Well, thank you, and I'm so excited that you're doing this. This is a great way to get to peek into other people's work. So thank you, and thanks Graham and Kristen and Ashley as well for your help in getting this all organized.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great day, and go see something beautiful.